Rurik Jutting was once a wealthy and successful banker living in Hong Kong, but behind closed doors he was something very different. His case would horrify the world, not only because of the crimes he committed, but because he chose to record his own confessions. Those recordings reveal a chilling look into the mind of a man consumed by arrogance, cocaine, and a desire for control. This story isn't just about his career or his status. It's about how far one individual fell into darkness and the terrifying evidence he left behind. Before we continue, I want to offer caution. This story involves disturbing details of violence and abuse. While I will not show any of the footage or imagery from the recordings, the subject matter itself may still be difficult to hear. Please use discretion while watching and step away if the material feels overwhelming. For those that have a desire to see the footage, an internet search might satisfy your curiosity, but here on YouTube, those images would not be approved. Join me for another strange, odd, and mysterious story here at Odd Mystery Stories. Rurik George Caton Jutting was not an ordinary banker. He had the credentials many might admire. Educated at Winchester College in England, a history and law degree from Cambridge, early work at Barclays Bank, later moving to Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Friends from school and his university remember him as sharp, perceptive, often ambitious, sometimes socially awkward, quote, arrogant, they would say, though also intelligent and capable. But his life in Hong Kong would mark a sudden and brutal turn. He moved to Hong Kong in 2013, still with status, wealth, and the promise of power, but something inside was breaking. Reports from the trial say he began mixing heavy cocaine use, excessive alcohol, and long periods alone in his luxury apartment, and a growing obsession with sex workers. His co-workers say his performance at work declined. He started missing meetings and behaving erratically. One detail that stood out in court: an automated out-of-office email from his professional address. Its tone was bizarre, even frightening. He called himself an insane psychopath, telling correspondents to contact someone who was not him, even suggesting that for escalation they could reach God, though he suspected the devil would have custody. By late 2014, according to investigators and psychiatric testimony, these threads, his privilege, his drug use, his resentments, his isolation, had begun weaving into something far more dangerous. Prosecutors say he recorded himself confessing acts of violence, whispering things like, "Watch me learn how to kill." He used his recordings not just as confession, but as documentation of his dissent. Hours of cruelty and confession that ultimately revealed what he had denied in public, that his ego, his narcotic dependency, and his capacity for cruelty had grown beyond whatever self-control he once had. By the time the murders occurred, the evidence in court painted a picture of a man who was less shocked by his own violence and more consumed by it. There was no turning back, no redemption arc, just an unraveling. Step out of Wan Chai after midnight, and the streets feel alive with neon. It's a district known for its nightlife, where expats and migrant workers often cross paths. For some, it's escape. For others, it's survival. It was here in October 2014 that two Indonesian women, Sumarti Ningsih and Seneng Mujiasih, also known as Jessie Lorena, would encounter Rurik Jutting. Both women were migrant workers. Sumarti had returned to Hong Kong trying to make ends meet after a difficult period. Seneng had overstayed her visa and was working odd jobs where she could. Their lives, marked by struggle and perseverance, would tragically intersect with Jutting's spiral. Accounts differ on exactly how these meetings unfolded. Some reports suggest Jutting would often waive large sums of money, sometimes as much as 1,000 Hong Kong dollars, it's about 130 US dollars, to invite women back to his apartment, It's alleged that he would use phrases like fancy an after party, but sources vary and not all agree on this detail. What is clear, however, is that he was actively seeking women during this time, often using his wealth as leverage. By this point, his own life was unraveling. Heavy cocaine use, alcohol, and long hours alone in his 31st floor apartment number 3109 were reshaping him. In London, he had once been remembered as a socially awkward man who could quote lines from The Office. In Hong Kong, some reports described how he tried to reinvent himself, working out, whitening his teeth, and frequently hiring escorts. Again, these details come from media accounts, and not all can be independently confirmed. What we do know for certain is that Jutting began recording himself. Hours of footage that prosecutors would later describe as so disturbing that even seasoned professionals needed counseling after viewing it. In these clips, he talked to the camera with a mix of bravado and self-loathing. At one point, he allegedly sneered at the city skyline and said, quote, "I'm better than all of this." Whether every word is captured accurately in reporting or not, the sentiment reflects the arrogance on display in his confessions. And the mindset is important, because when someone convinces themselves that they are above the world around them, the lives of others can start to look disposable. For Sumarti and Seneng, Jutting's privilege, his addiction, and his disordered thinking would prove deadly. October 26th, late night. Wan Chai is still awake. Sumarti meets Rurik. The exact approach is described differently across reports, but prosecutors later said he had been using large amounts of cocaine and was already recording himself around this time. Court exhibits confirmed the recordings, the cocaine use, and its impact were described by experts in his own police interview videos. Inside his 31st floor apartment, boundaries collapse. It is alleged that restraints were used. Trial coverage specifically mentions ropes he prepared, while some secondary accounts mention zip ties. The exact implement differs by source, but the pattern of control is not disputed. Across the next few days, the violence escalates. I will not repeat graphic details, but court reporting documents severe injuries to the first victim, Sumarti, and then a fatal throat wound. Any exact injury counts in media vary and aren't consistently corroborated by trial coverage, so I won't state a precise number here. He keeps filming. In one clip, played for the jury, he identifies himself, acknowledges what he had done, and speaks about his drug use and mindset. These recordings were central to the case. Jurors viewed or heard them in court. October 31st to November 1st, days after the first killing. Seneng crosses his path. The meeting details vary by outlet, but what's agreed is the outcome. In the early hours of November 1st, police respond to his calls. Seneng is found in the apartment and is pronounced dead shortly after. Hours later, officers discover Sumarti's body in a suitcase on the balcony. From his own statements to the police and on video, the picture is consistent. A cocaine-fueled descent, deliberate recordings, and escalating cruelty, where some outlets add colorful specifics, brand names, captions, counts. I will mark those as unverified unless a reputable court report supports them. When someone starts filming themselves to narrate their crimes, what are they trying to prove? Power? Immunity? Or simply that they exist above consequence? And if drug use magnifies what is already there, where does compulsion end and character begin? Between the 28th and 30th of October 2014, Rurik filmed some of the most disturbing footage investigators in Hong Kong had ever encountered. The recordings were later played in court, and they were so graphic that even hardened legal staff and police officers were offered trauma counseling afterward. This is the sanitized version, because the original footage is far too graphic and will never be shown here. According to prosecutors and psychiatric experts, Jutting bound his first victim, Sumarti Ningsih, and filmed himself while abusing and humiliating her. Sources differ on the exact details. Some accounts state she was restrained with ropes and gagged. Others claim he used towels or tape. What is clear is that she was held captive, forced to face her own reflection, and subjected to prolonged violence. The specific imagery varies by source, so I'll only share what is consistently documented. Several reports describe him giving a running commentary during the abuse. Some outlets quote lines such as, quote, "Note the wrist angle, maximum sting, minimum bruise." Whether those are exact words or paraphrased is debated, but all accounts agree that he narrated his actions in a chilling, matter-of-fact tone. It is alleged that he forced her to repeat degrading phrases, including words like, quote, "I'm worthless." There are also claims he recorded her sobs and manipulated her responses. Some sources suggest he sprinkled cocaine on her gums to keep her conscious. These elements appear in secondary reporting, but are not uniformly confirmed in trial records, so they should be treated cautiously. Forensic psychiatrists who reviewed the case described his behavior as textbook sexual sadism, arousal not from intimacy, but from exerting absolute control over another human being. That diagnosis is consistent across multiple sources. On the third day, Sumarti reportedly tried a different tactic. Instead of begging, she appealed to his reason, asking to call her son back home in central Java, offering to stay willingly if he allowed her that moment. Some accounts say for a brief instant he hesitated, but it ended violently. The fact established in court is that her throat was cut and she was killed. The lead-up, however, is described differently depending upon which media outlet you read. After her death, her body was placed in a suitcase and left on the balcony of his apartment. That detail is confirmed in police testimony and photographic evidence presented in court. Some outlets report that he attempted to cover the smell with cologne. Others omit this entirely. Whether or not he made any kind of, quote, Oscar speech into the camera afterward also varies by source. What is consistent is that his recordings captured not only the violence itself, but his disturbing self-commentary. And that is enough to understand the mindset without going into unnecessary detail. A man who filmed cruelty as if it were an achievement, leaving behind recordings that prosecutors later said secured his life sentence. When someone chooses to document their own crimes so meticulously, what is it that they want? Validation? Legacy? Or simply proof to themselves of how far they've fallen? And how does society even begin to interpret such evidence, when the act of recording seems as monstrous as the crime itself? Some media outlets have reported even more lurid details about the hours leading up to Rurik's arrest. According to those reports, he allegedly tried to book a third escort after the murders. The story goes that she noticed blood under the sofa, claimed she had forgotten her wallet downstairs, and tipped off building security. From there, the police were supposedly called in. Other accounts claim officers found him shirtless, pupils constricted, asking them if they wanted to watch what he called a highlight reel. In the same set of reports, it said that police recovered some 2,000 photos, 24 videos, and even a whiteboard scrawled with porn site passwords and the phrase, "If you're reading this, I win." But here's what I found after careful research. These details are not confirmed in court records or in major outlets like The Guardian, BBC, or the South China Morning Post. They remain unverified, more rumor than fact, and they should be treated with caution. What we do know beyond dispute is that when police entered Jutting's apartment in the early hours of November 1st, 2014, they found a horrifying scene. Inside the apartment, Seneng Mujiasih lay gravely injured and was pronounced dead shortly after. Out on the balcony, inside a suitcase, officers discovered the body of Sumarti Ningsih. Alongside those discoveries, police seized Jutting's iPhone and computer, which contained the videos and confessions he had recorded himself. So, while the talk of highlight reels, hidden blood stains, and whiteboards may catch attention in sensational reporting, the essential fact remains chilling enough. Jutting had already documented his crimes in painstaking detail, leaving prosecutors with an almost complete record of his descent. When the trial opened in Hong Kong in 2016, the defense strategy was clear: blame the drugs. Lawyers argued that Rurik was spiraling under the influence of cocaine, suffering from drug-induced psychosis and driven by sexual sadism that blurred his control. Psychiatrists were brought in to testify about narcissistic personality disorder, substance abuse, and paraphilic disorders. But the prosecution wasn't swayed. They came armed with receipts, the restraints he had bought in advance, the camera lights, and a damning Google history that included searches like, quote, "how long to boil a body." Their case was simple. This wasn't a drug binge gone wrong. This was deliberate cruelty, planned and executed. The jury needed just 3 hours to reach their verdict: guilty on 2 counts of murder. The judge handed down a life sentence with a minimum of 28 years, meaning Rurik would be eligible for release only in his late 60s, if ever. As the sentence was read, he was seen doodling symbols and figures on his legal pad, as though calculating the portion of his life he still had left. And yet the question lingered: how does a man with every advantage, education, wealth, opportunity, end up here? There was no easy checklist. No childhood trauma reported, no head injury, no history of abuse that might explain the spiral. Some friends pointed to a broken engagement years earlier, noting how his fiancée's infidelity seemed to harden him. He swapped the engagement ring for gym routines, bleached teeth, and an obsession with Ayn Rand. Others described him as arrogant even in his younger years. Brilliant but difficult, with flashes of disdain for those he considered beneath him. Clinicians, however, suggested something deeper: a long-standing narcissism that, when mixed with cocaine, ballooned into a god complex. Add in violent pornography, the easy anonymity of an expat life in Hong Kong, and a craving for validation through his camera, and you have what one psychiatrist called a perfect storm. The recordings themselves confirm his mindset. In them, Rurik reduces people to numbers, comparing year-end bonuses to the, quote, price of life, as if both could be entered side by side in a spreadsheet. At one point, he is alleged to have said, "I could buy her 100 times over." Whether those words were exact or paraphrased in reporting, the meaning is unmistakable. He viewed life and death as transactions. So what transformed a Cambridge-educated banker into a killer who filmed his own crimes? Was it cocaine? Ego? Pornography? Or the hidden arrogance of a man who always believed that he was untouchable? The jury may have delivered a verdict, but the puzzle of who he really was, and why he fell so far, still remains unanswered. Rurik Jutting is still alive today. He sits inside Stanley Prison in Hong Kong, serving his life sentence with a minimum of 28 years. Some reports say he spends his time translating investment textbooks into Braille. His lawyers call it redemption. Guards, on the other hand, have called it unsettling. What is also reported is that he has written letters from prison, sometimes signing them Rurik the Great, asking pen pals for Amazon credit, even predicting he might be out by his mid-50s. In one alleged exchange, he talked about a dream of opening a dive shop in Bali. Whether or not those plans are fantasy, they underscore the same arrogance that defined him, a belief that the world doesn't get a vote. But while he contemplates a future, the families of his victims carry the weight of what he did. Both mothers have had to follow the long legal process through phone updates and messages, unable to travel for every hearing. For them, There is no parole from grief. And that's the truth many of us resist. We want monsters to look monstrous. Horns, slime, glowing eyes. But Jutting looked like anyone you might scroll past on LinkedIn. Checked shirt, rimless glasses, a resume stacked with accomplishments. The recordings he left behind stripped away that facade and forced us to confront a harder question. How many polished resumes masked the same rot? In one of his tapes, he panned across the Hong Kong skyline and whispered, "You built this for me." Arrogant? Absolutely. Wrong? Not entirely, because the culture that celebrated excess, bonuses, and bravado helped blind him, and maybe others, to accountability. But above it all, this story isn't his. It belongs to Sumarti Ningsih and Seneng Mujiasih. Sumarti's young son is now 12, raised by relatives who can only tell him his mother went abroad to work and never came home. Seneng's brother left college and now delivers noodles 6 nights a week to help support their parents. Their grief doesn't end, but by remembering their names, we hold on to what really matters. They were 2 women who crossed oceans, endured brutal hours of labor, and sent every spare coin back home so that others might dream. They died in an apartment worth more than their villages combined, reduced to evidence tags by a man who thought privilege exempted him from humanity. And that is where this story closes, not with his ego, not with his so-called tapes, but with the memory of 2 lives that deserved far more. If privilege without accountability defines his legacy, then those recordings remain his final audit, a record of cruelty that no one asked for, but everyone must remember. What do you think allows someone with every advantage to fall so far? And could it ever be prevented? And what are your thoughts on this case? Share them below in the comments. Your voice matters. Hey, thanks for watching my video. My name is Vince. If you found this story interesting, hit the like button. It lets me know you'd like more mysteries like this. If you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next case I cover. Before you go, don't stop here. You should see other videos from my channel on your screen right now. Just click one and keep the mystery going. Each case opens new questions, new theories, and new twists worth exploring. Thanks again for spending your time with me today. The next mystery is just a short time away.